The Alpha King ordered the silent Omega removed from his court. Ivara Wren stood in the center of the great stone hall hands, bound behind her back, her simple gray robes, marking her as one of the lowest Omegas in service. The entire royal court had gathered to witness her dismissal. No one spoke in her defense. No one ever did. Alpha King Torin Blackmere sat upon the obsidian throne tall and commanding, his dark hair streaked with silver from years of war. His golden eyes were cold as they looked down at her. High Voice Keeper Malric Sable stood at his right, one hand resting on a pale bone bell hanging from his belt. At the king's judgment, Malric's thumb brushed the bone bell once, and the pale thing gave a dry, almost hungry sound. "You have served in silence for years," Torin said, his voice echoing through the hall. "Yet you offer nothing the pack needs. No voice, no strength, no future." High Voice Keeper Malric is right. You are a burden we can no longer carry. Lady Vera Solm, the ambitious noblewoman waiting to take a higher place at court, smiled faintly from the side of the throne. Ivara had no voice to protest. The old seal at her throat burned whenever she even tried to force a sound. So she lifted her chin and looked straight at Torin instead. The two guards stepped forward and took her by the arms. Their grip was firm but not cruel. They had their orders. As they began to lead her away, the moment their hands touched her skin, something shifted in the air. Beneath Torin's ribs, his royal wolf struck once against his chest. For the first time in years, the beast tried to rise. Torin forced it down. Ivara was led out of the great hall and through the long corridors toward the outer gates. Beyond those gates, an unmated Omega without pack protection was little better than prey. She did not resist. She simply walked her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. She had served this citadel quietly for years, healing the wounded, tending the weak, listening when no one else would. Now she was being thrown away like something broken and useless. As they reached the outer courtyard, the sun was beginning to set. The guards pushed her forward, preparing to escort her beyond the gates. At that exact moment, a low resonant sound rose from beneath the citadel. Not a howl the living could hear, but one every wolf spirit remembered. The stones beneath the courtyard split with thin silver light. Deep in the royal crypts, the dead wolves opened their eyes, and every one of them turned toward Ivara. The silent Omega had not spoken, but the dead had answered anyway. The guards continued leading Ivara through the outer courtyard as the last light of day faded. Beyond the gates, an unmated Omega without pack protection was little better than prey. Yet something had changed. The air around her had grown heavy thick with the weight of unseen eyes. The guards kept glancing over their shoulders, their grips tightening on her arms. They had felt it too, that low resonant sound rising from beneath the citadel. Behind them, deep in the royal crypts, the dead wolves had begun to move. The silver light rose from the cracks in the stone. From the earth, translucent forms emerged, the shapes of wolves, their bodies made of silver mist and shadow. Their eyes glowed with cold, ancient light. These were not living wolves. These were the spirits of the pack's ancestors. They rose around Ivara, forming a loose circle. None of them growled, none of them attacked. They simply stood, their ghostly bodies facing outward, as if guarding her. The guards released her arms and stepped back in horror. High above, on the balcony of the citadel, Alpha King Torin Blackmere watched the scene unfold. His golden eyes were wide with disbelief. Beneath his ribs, his royal wolf was no longer still. It was pacing violently, trying to force its way to the surface. Torin gripped the stone railing until his knuckles turned white. Malric Sable stood beside him, his hand now clutching the bone bell at his belt. "Your Majesty," Malric said in a low, urgent voice, "this is dangerous. The dead should not answer to an Omega, especially not one who cannot speak." We must stop this before the entire pack sees. Malric's thumb struck the bone bell once. The dry note cut through the courtyard. Ivara's throat burned so sharply that her knees nearly gave way. The nearest dead wolf turned its glowing eyes toward Malric and bared silent teeth. Torin looked from Ivara's burning throat to Malric's hand on the bell. "Bring her back," he ordered. Malric's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, the Council has already decided. I said bring her back," Torin repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Now?" Malric's fingers tightened around the bone bell. For a brief moment, something dark flickered in his eyes, but he bowed his head. "As you command." Down in the courtyard, the two guards were still frozen when Malric's voice rang out from above. "Return the Omega to the hall. The king has changed his judgment." The guards hesitated, glancing at the ghostly wolves still standing protectively around Ivara. The spirits did not move to stop them, but their glowing eyes watched every step. Slowly, the guards took Ivara by the arms again and began leading her back toward the citadel. As she walked, the silver light beneath the stones faded. One by one, the dead wolves sank back into the earth, returning to their rest. But before the last one disappeared, it turned its head and looked directly at Ivara. Ivara lowered her head once, not in submission, but in answer. Behind her, Malric's bone bell rang once by itself. The guards led Ivara back into the great hall under the watchful eyes of the entire court. The silver light beneath the courtyard had faded, but the memory of it lingered in everyone's mind. Whispers spread like wildfire among the wolves gathered there. The silent Omega had called the dead, and the dead had answered. Ivara walked with her head slightly lowered, but her back remained straight. The old seal at her throat still burned faintly from when Malric had struck the bone bell. She could feel the eyes of the court on her, some filled with fear, others with curiosity, and a few with open hostility. Torin Blackmere stood on the dais, his golden eyes fixed on her as she approached. His royal wolf was still restless beneath his skin, pushing against the boundaries he had kept tight for years. Malric Sable stood at Torin's right, his hand, now clutching the bone bell at his belt. Torin raised his hand, and the murmurs in the hall died down. "Bring her forward," he commanded. The guards released Ivara in the center of the hall. She stood alone before the throne, her bound hands behind her back. She did not speak, she could not, but she lifted her chin and met the Alpha King's gaze directly. Torin studied her for a long moment. "You were ordered to leave," he said. "Yet the moment the guards touched you, the dead wolves of this pack rose to your defense. Explain this." Ivara remained silent. Instead, she simply held his gaze, letting the truth stand in the silence between them. Then her eyes shifted once not to the throne but to the pale bone bell at Malric's belt. Malric's thumb brushed the bone bell once more. The dry note cut through the air. The bell twitched once in Malric's hand, though he had not moved his fingers. Torin's eyes narrowed slightly. He had seen it. Malric stepped forward, his voice smooth and measured. "Your Majesty," he said, "this is clearly the work of forbidden magic. The dead should not answer to an Omega, especially not one who has been sealed. The voice bone bell can reveal whether she has been tampering with forces she does not understand." Torin looked from Ivara's burning throat to Malric's hand on the bell. "Ivara Wren will remain in the citadel under my direct protection until I understand what has happened here tonight," he announced. "No council hand will touch her without my command." A wave of shock rippled through the hall. Lady Vera Solm stepped forward, her voice sweet but edged with ice. "Your Majesty, with respect, the council has already decided. Keeping her here after such a display of power is dangerous. The dead wolves have not answered to a living soul in decades. Why now? Why her?" She paused, then added softly, Protection can look very much like favoritism when it is given to a girl the dead already obey. Torin turned his gaze to Vera. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Then perhaps it is time we remember that the dead do not obey ambition. They obey truth. He looked back at Ivara. Unbind her hands. One of the guards hesitated, then stepped forward and cut the ropes around Ivara's wrists. She rubbed her wrists slowly but kept her eyes on the king. Torin descended the steps of the dais until he stood directly in front of her. Your throat, he said quietly so only she could hear. It burned when Malric touched the bell. Ivara gave the smallest nod. Torin's jaw tightened. He turned back to the court. The judgment will be delayed. Ivara Wren will remain under my protection. Anyone who raises a hand against her will answer to me personally. As the court began to disperse in uneasy murmurs, Torin turned to Ivara. Come with me. She followed him out of the great hall without resistance. The ghostly wolves that had protected her earlier had vanished back into the earth, but she could still feel their presence somewhere beneath the citadel. As they walked through the corridors, Torin spoke without looking at her. I do not know what you are, he said, but my wolf has not reacted to anyone like this in years, and the dead wolves, they recognized you. Ivara walked beside him in silence. She wanted to tell him everything about the seal on her voice, about the voicebone bell, about Malric's role in it all. But she could not speak. All she could do was stay close and hope he would see the truth on his own. Far down the corridor, the old seal at Ivara's throat burned in answer. Behind them, Malric Sable watched them leave his fingers still resting on the bone bell. The bell did not ring, but it trembled once as if something inside it was waking up. Torin led Ivara through the quieter corridors of the citadel until they reached a small chamber used for private council meetings. He closed the heavy door behind them, shutting out the noise of the court. Only the sound of the crackling fire in the hearth remained. Ivara stood near the center of the room, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had left red marks. She kept her eyes lowered, but her posture was alert. Torin walked to the window and stared out at the darkening sky for a long moment before turning to face her. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. Ivara hesitated, then sat. The warmth from the flames felt strange against her skin after the cold of the courtyard. Torin remained standing. He studied her in silence for several seconds. You cannot speak, he said finally. It was not a question. Ivara shook her head once. Torin's gaze dropped to the faint mark visible just above the collar of her robe. The old seal burned into her skin. How long has it been like this? Ivara lifted her hand and traced the shape of the seal with 2 fingers. Then she held up 5 fingers, then another 5. 10 years. Torin's jaw tightened. Malric did this to you, he said. It was not a question this time either. Ivara met his eyes and gave a small, slow nod. Torin turned away and paced once across the room. His royal wolf was still agitated, pacing beneath his skin in a way it had not done in years. Every time he looked at Ivara, the beast pushed harder. He stopped and faced her again. When the guards touched you, my wolf tried to rise. For the first time in years it fought me, and the dead wolves in the crypts, they answered you. Not the pack, not the living, the dead. He stepped closer. Why, you... Ivara looked at him for a long moment. Then she slowly raised her hand and pointed at the bone bell that Malric usually carried. She made a small motion as if striking it, then touched her throat and winced. Torin understood. The bell suppresses your voice, he said quietly, and Malric controls it. Ivara nodded again. Torin ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired in a way she had never seen before. I have ruled this pack through war and blood, he said. I have trusted Malric with the voice of our ancestors for years. If what you are showing me is true, then I have been blind. He stepped closer to her chair and knelt so they were at eye level. I need to know the truth, Ivara, all of it, but you cannot speak it. Ivara hesitated. Then she slowly reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold. She pressed his palm flat against the seal at her throat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint silver light flickered between his hand and her skin. Torin's eyes widened. He could feel it. A pulse like a heartbeat that did not belong to either of them. Beneath it, he could sense something ancient and broken. A bond that had been forcibly sealed. His wolf surged forward again, this time so strongly that Torin had to grit his teeth to keep it from breaking through. When he pulled his hand back, the silver light faded. Ivara looked at him, her eyes asking a silent question. Torin stood up slowly. Tomorrow, he said, we will go to the royal crypts. I want to see where the dead wolves answered you. And I want to know why my own wolf is reacting to you like this. He paused. Until then, you will stay in the East Wing under guard. No one, not Malric, not Vera, not the Council, will be allowed near you without my permission. Ivara lowered her head once in acknowledgement. Torin turned to leave but stopped at the door. Ivara. She looked up. I was wrong to cast you out, he said, and I will not make that mistake again. He left the room, closing the door behind him. Ivara sat alone by the fire for a long time, staring into the flames. Her throat still burned faintly from the bell, but for the first time in many years she felt something else beneath the pain. Hope. Far away in the lower levels of the citadel, Malric Sable stood before the voice-bone bell which now hung on a stone altar. The pale bone surface was cracked with thin silver lines. He placed his hand on it and whispered an ancient word. The bell did not ring, but deep beneath the citadel something answered anyway, and it was not answering to him. The next morning Torin came for Ivara before the sun had fully risen. She was already awake, sitting by the window of the East Wing chamber he had assigned her. 2 guards stood outside the door, but they did not enter. Torin had made it clear that no one was to disturb her without his permission. When he stepped inside, he was wearing a dark cloak over his usual black and silver robes. His golden eyes were sharp, but there was something different in them today. A quiet determination. Come, he said. We are going to the crypts. Ivara stood without hesitation and followed him. They walked in silence through the long stone corridors of the citadel. The few wolves they passed lowered their heads quickly, but Ivara could feel their eyes on her. Word of what had happened in the courtyard had already spread. The silent Omega had called the dead, and the Alpha King was protecting her. Torin led her down a narrow staircase hidden behind a heavy tapestry. The air grew colder as they descended. The walls here were older, carved with ancient runes that pulsed faintly with silver light. At the bottom of the stairs stood a pair of massive iron doors. 2 royal guards stood watch, but they stepped aside the moment they saw Torin. He placed his hand on the door. The runes glowed brighter for a moment. Then the doors swung open with a low groan. The royal crypt stretched out before them, a vast underground chamber lined with stone tombs. The air was thick with the weight of centuries. Torin lit a torch from a sconce on the wall and stepped inside. Ivara followed closely behind him. As they walked deeper into the crypt, the temperature dropped further. The silence was absolute. Torin stopped in front of a large stone altar at the center of the chamber. This was where the kings of the past had been laid to rest. Their names were carved into the walls in ancient script. He turned to Ivara. Last night the dead wolves rose when the guards touched you. Show me. Ivara stepped forward. She walked to the center of the chamber and slowly knelt on the cold stone floor. She placed both palms flat against the ground. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the silver light began to seep from the cracks between the stones once more. One by one, translucent wolves emerged from the earth. Their forms were made of mist and shadow, their eyes glowing with cold light. They did not growl. They did not bare their teeth at Torin. Instead, they moved slowly toward Ivara and formed a circle around her, just as they had done in the courtyard. Torin watched in stunned silence. One of the larger wolves, its form slightly more solid than the others, stepped closer to Ivara. It lowered its head until its glowing eyes were level with hers. Then it gently pressed its misty forehead against her palm. Torin's breath caught. He could feel it through his own bond, a pulse of recognition. The dead wolf was not just acknowledging Ivara, it was submitting to her. His royal wolf surged forward again so violently this time that Torin had to brace a hand against the stone wall to stay upright. Ivara looked up at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a question in them. Torin stepped closer, stopping just outside the circle of spectral wolves. "My wolf has been silent for years," he said quietly. "The bond that should connect me to the ancestors has been weakening. I thought it was the weight of ruling. I thought it was war. But now," he looked at the wolf still pressing its head against Ivara's hand. "Now I wonder if something or someone has been cutting me off from them." Ivara slowly stood. The wolves around her did not move away. They simply watched. She reached out and took Torin's hand. She placed it against her throat over the old seal. The moment his skin touched the mark, silver light flared again. This time it was stronger. Torin felt a rush of images flash through his mind. Not his own memories, but fragments of something older. A voice. A bell. A hand striking it again and again. And then silence. Torin pulled his hand back, breathing hard. "Malric," he said. "He did not just seal your voice. He used it to weaken the royal bond itself." Ivara nodded once. Torin's expression darkened. "If that is true, then he has been betraying this pack for years. And I have been too blind to see it." He looked around at the dead wolves still surrounding Ivara. "They answer to you because your voice, the true voice of the pack, was never meant to be silenced. Malric stole it. And he used it to keep me from hearing the ancestors." One of the spectral wolves suddenly lifted its head and let out a silent howl. The sound did not reach their ears, but both Torin and Ivara felt it ripple through the crypt like a wave. Torin turned sharply toward the entrance. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Torin drew his sword and stepped in front of Ivara, shielding her with his body. The dead wolves turned as one, their glowing eyes fixed on the stairway. Malric Sable appeared at the top of the stairs, flanked by 4 armed guards. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, "I heard you had come to the crypts. I thought it best to accompany you. It is dangerous to be down here alone with her." Torin did not lower his sword. "Leave," he said. "Now." Malric smiled faintly. "I am afraid I cannot do that. The council has grown concerned. An Omega who can command the dead is a threat to the throne. We cannot allow her to remain here." The 4 guards behind him drew their weapons. Torin's golden eyes burned. Behind him, Ivara placed a hand on his back. The dead wolves moved closer, forming a tighter circle around them both. Malric's gaze flicked to the spectral wolves, then back to Torin. "You would stand against your own council for a silent Omega?" he asked. Torin's voice was low and final. "I would stand against anyone who tries to take what the moon has returned to this pack." Malric's smile faded. "Then you leave me no choice." He raised the bone bell. The moment his fingers touched it, the dead wolves let out another silent howl, this one filled with rage. And deep beneath the crypt, something ancient began to stir. Malric Sable raised the bone bell high. The moment his fingers struck it, a sharp, dry note cut through the crypt like a blade. The sound was not loud, but it carried power. The same power that had sealed Ivara's voice for 10 long years. Ivara's throat burned as if fire had been poured down it. She staggered, one hand flying to the seal at her neck. The dead wolves around her flickered violently, their silver forms wavering. Torin moved without hesitation. He stepped in front of Ivara's sword, raised his body a shield between her and Malric. "Enough," he growled. But Malric only smiled. "You see, Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth and poisonous. "She is dangerous. The dead should not obey a voiceless Omega. This power does not belong to her. It belongs to the throne, to the one who can control it." He struck the bell again. The note rang louder. Ivara dropped to one knee, gasping silently. The pain in her throat was blinding. The dead wolves howled without sound, their forms beginning to fade as the bell's power pulled at them. Torin's royal wolf slammed against his ribs so hard he nearly lost his balance. Protect. This time he did not fight it. Golden light flared from his own chest, meeting the dark resonance of the bone bell. The two forces collided in the air above Ivara, creating a storm of silver and gold sparks that lit up the entire crypt. The dead wolves stabilized. One by one, they turned toward Malric and bared their silent teeth. Malric's smile faltered for the first time. "You dare raise the dead against your king," Torin said, his voice low and deadly. "You dare use that bell to hurt her." Malric took a step back, but his hand remained on the bell. "I have protected this throne for years," he hissed. "While you chased wars and glory, I kept the old bonds sealed so the pack would not tear itself apart." Her voice was the price. A small price for stability. Ivara slowly rose to her feet behind Torin. Her throat still burned, but she refused to fall again. She placed one hand on Torin's back and the other against her seal. Golden light, faint at first then growing stronger, poured from her palm into the seal. The bone bell in Malric's hand began to crack. Malric's eyes widened in horror. "No," he whispered. "This is impossible. The seal cannot be broken." It cracked louder. The dead wolves surged forward. Their misty forms passed through Torin and surrounded Malric and his guards. The four-armed men dropped their weapons and fell to their knees in terror. Malric tried to strike the bell again, but the crack widened. A pure, clear note, Ivara's stolen voice, rang out from the fracturing bone. The sound was beautiful, ancient, powerful. Every dead wolf in the crypt lifted its head and howled in answer. Malric screamed as the silver light engulfed him. The bone bell shattered in his hand, the pieces turning to glowing dust. The seal at Ivara's throat burned one final time, then went cold. For the first time in 10 years, she drew in a deep breath and spoke. Enough. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the crypt like moonlight on water. Every wolf spirit froze. Even Torin turned to look at her stunned. Ivara stepped out from behind him. Her eyes were steady as she looked at Malric. "You stole my voice to hide your betrayal," she said. The words came slowly, as if her throat was still learning how to shape them. "You used it to weaken the king's bond with the ancestors. You kept this pack in fear so you could rule from the shadows." Malric fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding hand. Torin's expression had turned to ice. "Take him," he ordered the guards who had come with Malric. "He will face the pack at dawn." As Malric was dragged away, Torin turned to Ivara. He reached out and gently touched the now cool seal at her throat. "Your voice," he whispered. Ivara looked up at him. For the first time, she smiled. Small, tentative, but real. "It was never lost," she said softly. "It was only waiting." Torin pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the dead wolves watched in silent approval. But deep beneath the crypt, something else stirred. The true power of the voice bone had not been destroyed. It had only been awakened. Dawn had barely broken when the great hall filled once more. This time, the atmosphere was different. The pack stood in tense silence, their eyes fixed on the center of the hall where Malric Sable knelt in heavy chains. The shattered pieces of the voicebone bell lay scattered on the stone floor before him like broken bones. Ivara stood beside Alpha King Torin Blackmere on the dais. For the first time in 10 years, she wore a proper robe, deep silver with threads of gold. Her voice had returned, but she spoke little. She was still learning how to use it again. Torin's presence was a wall of quiet fury beside her. High Voice Keeper Malric Sable, Torin began, his voice echoing through the hall. You are accused of stealing the true voice of the pack, of sealing Ivara Wren's power for 10 years, of weakening the royal bond with our ancestors so you could rule from the shadows. What do you say in your defense? Malric lifted his head. Even in chains, his eyes burned with arrogance. I protected this throne, he said. The old bonds were too dangerous. A silent Omega suddenly speaking with the voice of the dead. That is not salvation. That is chaos. I did what a true keeper must do. Ivara stepped forward. Her voice, though still soft from long disuse, carried clearly through the hall. You did not protect the throne, she said. You protected your own power. You used my voice to silence the ancestors so the king would never hear their warnings. You kept this pack blind. A murmur rippled through the wolves. Torin raised his hand for silence. Last night in the royal crypts, the dead wolves answered her. They bared their teeth at you when you tried to silence her again. The voicebone bell shattered in your hand. The seal on her throat broke. The ancestors have spoken. He looked out at the pack. I was blind. I allowed fear and tradition to guide my judgment. I cast out the one the moon had chosen. Today I correct that mistake. Torin turned to Ivara. Before the entire pack he knelt. Ivara Wren, he said, his voice steady in public. You are no longer the silent Omega. You are the voice of the ancestors. You are my Luna, and I ask you before this pack and before the dead who watch us to stand with me as my equal. The hall fell into stunned silence. Ivara looked down at him. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice did not waver. I accept, she said, not as a replacement for what was lost, but as the one who will help this pack remember what it once was. Torin rose and took her hand. He pulled her close and kissed her, not in private, but before every wolf in the hall. The kiss was slow, deep, and filled with everything they had both held back. Golden and silver light burst from them, spreading across the great hall. The old Luna bell rang loud and clear. The dead wolves in the crypts howled in answer, their voices echoing through the stone. When they parted, the pack began to kneel, one by one, until the entire hall was on its knees before them. But not everyone knelt. Lady Vera Solm stood near the side of the hall, her face pale with rage. She turned and slipped away through a side door before anyone could stop her. Torin noticed, but said nothing. Later that evening, in the quiet of the royal chambers, Ivara stood by the window looking out at the moonlit forest. The 5 cubs, now clearly stronger, slept peacefully in a nest near the hearth. Torin came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. You should rest, he murmured against her hair. I cannot, she whispered. Not yet. Something is still wrong. I can feel it in the seal, even though it is broken, a shadow remains. Torin turned her gently to face him. Malric is in chains. The bell is destroyed. What shadow could remain? Ivara touched the faint scar at her throat. Malric was only the hand, she said. Someone else gave him the power to seal my voice. Someone who wanted your wolf bond weakened for a very long time. Torin's golden eyes darkened. Vera, he said. Ivara nodded. Outside the chamber, in a hidden passage beneath the citadel, Lady Vera Solm stood before a second, smaller bone relic. This one was not cracked. She smiled coldly as she ran her fingers over it. "The game is not over yet, my king," she whispered. "The true voice may have returned, but the true curse still sleeps." The celebration in the great hall lasted until deep into the night. Torin and Ivara stood together on the dais as wolves came forward one by one to offer their loyalty. Some brought small gifts, herbs, silver charms, woven cloths. Others simply knelt and touched their foreheads to the floor in silent apology. Ivara accepted each one with quiet grace. Her voice, though still soft, had grown stronger with every word she spoke. The dead wolves no longer needed to rise from the crypts. She could feel them now, a steady presence beneath the citadel, watching and waiting. But peace was fragile. Late that night, as Torin and Ivara walked back to the royal chambers, the old seal at Ivara's throat began to burn again. Not as fiercely as before, but enough to make her falter. Torin caught her arm. "What is it?" Ivara touched the scar. "Vera," she whispered. "She is using the second relic. I can feel it pulling at the bond." Torin's expression hardened. He signaled to the guards. "Double the watch around the east wing. No one enters or leaves without my word." They had barely reached the royal chambers when the attack came. The windows shattered inward as dark energy exploded through the glass. Shadowy tendrils, formed from stolen voices and broken bonds, lashed toward Ivara. The 5 moonborn cubs in their nest whimpered in terror, their crescent marks flickering wildly. Ivara stepped forward without hesitation. She placed both hands on the nearest cub and let the golden light pour from her scar. The light met the dark tendrils and burned them away. Torin drew his sword and moved to shield her, but the shadows were everywhere. They wrapped around his legs, trying to pull him down. "Vera," he roared. "Show yourself." From the broken window, Lady Vera Solm stepped into the room holding a smaller bone relic, the twin to the one that had shattered. Her face was twisted with hatred. "You should have stayed silent," she hissed at Ivara. "You were perfect as you were, voiceless, powerless, invisible. With your voice sealed, Torin's wolf bond weakened every year. I was this close to becoming the true power behind the throne." She raised the relic. The dark energy surged again, stronger this time. Ivara felt it pulling at her newly returned voice, trying to drag it back into silence. But she refused. She stepped past Torin, standing directly in front of Vera. The 5 cubs followed her, their small bodies trembling, but their crescent marks glowing brighter than ever. Ivara spoke, her voice clear and steady. "You stole my voice to control a king. You cursed this pack's bond with the ancestors for your own ambition. The dead have already judged you." She placed one hand on the smallest cub and the other over her own heart. Golden light exploded outward. The light struck the smaller bone relic in Vera's hand. The relic cracked, then shattered completely. The dark tendrils dissolved into nothing. Vera screamed as the backlash threw her against the wall. Torin moved forward, sword raised, but Ivara stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "No," she said softly. "She does not deserve a king's blade." She looked at Vera, who was struggling to stand. "The pack will judge you at dawn," Ivara said. "As they judged Malric. As they will judge anyone who tries to break what the moon has mended." Vera laughed, bitterly, blood on her lips. "You think this ends with me? There are others who want the old ways back. You may have found your voice, Silent One, but the shadows in this pack run deeper than you know." Guards rushed into the room and seized Vera. Torin pulled Ivara close his arms, wrapping around her protectively as the cubs pressed against their legs. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. Ivara shook her head and leaned into him. "Not anymore," she whispered. Outside the broken window, the moon-born wolves howled in the distance, not in warning, but in triumph. But deep beneath the citadel in a chamber, even Malric had never found another ancient relic pulsed once in the darkness. The true game was far from over. The morning after Veyra's attack, the great hall was packed once more. This time there was no uncertainty in the air. The pack had seen too much. They had witnessed the dead wolves rise, the bone bell shatter, and the silent Omega speak with the voice of their ancestors. Ivara stood beside Torin on the dais, the 5 moon-born cubs resting calmly at her feet. Their silver crescent marks glowed steadily, a living symbol of the bond that had been restored. Malric Sable and Lady Veyra Solm knelt in chains before the throne. Both looked broken. Malric's arrogance had crumbled, and Veyra's ambition had turned to ash. Torin's voice rang out clear and final. High Voice Keeper Malric Sable, Lady Veyra Solm, you have conspired to steal the true voice of the pack. You sealed Ivara Wren's power for 10 years. You weakened the royal bond with our ancestors so you could rule from the shadows. Your betrayal ends today. Malric lifted his head, his voice hoarse. I did it for the pack, he rasped. A voiceless Omega could not lead us. She was a threat. Ivara stepped forward. Her voice still soft but growing stronger with every word carried through the hall without effort. You did it for power, she said. You used my voice to silence the ancestors so the king would never hear their warnings. You kept this pack in fear and darkness so you could remain in control. She looked at Veyra. And you, she continued, used the second relic to try to kill the cubs and me. You wanted a weak king and a silent Luna so you could sit behind the throne. The pack murmured in agreement. Many wolves now looked at the 2 traitors with open disgust. Torin raised his hand for silence. Malric Sable and Lady Veyra Solm are hereby stripped of all titles and banished from the Moonlit Pack. Their names will be struck from every record. The voice bone relics will be destroyed. From this day forward, no one will ever again steal the voice of another to control this pack. 2 guards stepped forward and dragged Malric and Veyra away. Torin turned to Ivara. Before the entire pack, he knelt once more. Ivara Wren, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You are the voice of the ancestors. You are the true Luna. You are the one, the dead wolves answered. And I choose you, not because the pack demands it, but because my wolf, my heart, and my kingdom need you. Will you stand with me as my mate and my queen? Ivara looked down at him. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice was steady and clear. I will, she said. I choose you, Torin. Not as a king who once cast me out, but as the man who chose truth when everything pushed him toward fear. We will lead this pack together as equals. Torin rose and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her deeply in front of the entire pack. A kiss filled with years of missed time, hard-earned redemption, and the promise of a future they had both fought for. Golden and silver light exploded outward from them, spreading through the hall and across the packlands. The old Luna bell rang loud and clear. The dead wolves in the crypts howled in triumph. The 5 moonborn cubs lifted their heads and joined the chorus with small, bright howls. When they parted, the pack began to kneel, one by one, until the entire hall was on its knees before them. Torin looked at Ivara, his golden eyes filled with something deeper than duty. Together, he whispered. Together, she answered. The old shadows had been broken, but in the deepest chamber beneath the citadel, one final relic, hidden even from Malric and Veyra, pulsed once in the darkness. The true test of their bond was still to come. The full moon rose high over the moonlit citadel, bathing the packlands in silver light. In the great hall, adorned with fresh banners and night-blooming flowers, Alpha King Torin Blackmere stood before the entire pack, with Ivara Wren at his side. The 5 moon-born cubs played quietly at their feet, their silver crescent marks glowing softly. Torin took Ivara's hand and raised it so all could see. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "we honor what was almost lost. Ivara Wren is no longer the silent Omega. She is the voice of the ancestors. She is the true Luna. She is the one the dead wolves answered when I cast her out. She is the heart this pack has been missing." He turned to her fully golden eyes, steady and open. "Ivara, before this pack, before the moon, and before the ancestors who watch over us, I ask you again, not as a king seeking power, but as a man who has learned what it means to truly see. Will you stand with me as my queen, my mate, and the voice of our future?" Ivara looked at him. Her voice still soft, but now clear and strong, carried through the hall without effort. "I will," she said. "I choose you, Torin. Not because the pack demands it, but because you chose truth when everything pushed you toward fear. We will lead this pack together, as equals." Torin pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply in front of the entire pack, a kiss filled with years of missed time, hard-earned redemption, and the promise of a future they had both fought for. Golden and silver light exploded outward from them, spreading through the hall and across the packlands. The old Luna bell rang loud and clear. The dead wolves in the crypts howled in triumph. The 5 moonborn cubs lifted their heads and joined the chorus with small, bright howls of their own. When they parted, the pack began to kneel one by one until the entire hall was on its knees before them. In the months that followed, the moonlit pack changed forever. The old laws that measured worth by strength and heirs alone were rewritten. The voicebone relics were destroyed. The bond between the living and the dead was restored. Moonborn wolves began appearing more frequently from the deep forests drawn by the awakened true Luna. Torin ruled with a balance of strength and compassion he had never known before. His royal wolf was finally at peace. One quiet spring evening, Ivara and Torin stood together on the highest balcony overlooking the blooming packlands. The 5 moonborn cubs, now strong and playful, tumbled around their feet. Torin wrapped his arms around Ivara from behind his hand, resting gently over her slightly rounded belly. "Our child will never know what it means to be measured by silence or strength alone," he murmured against her hair. "They will grow up knowing they are loved for who they are." Ivara smiled and leaned back against him. "And they will know that even those the pack once called worthless can become the voice that saves us all," she whispered. "Not just of the living, but of the dead who never truly left us." The moonborn wolves howled softly in the distance. The woman the pack had ordered removed as useless had become its heart, its voice, and its savior. Their love was not born of perfect circumstances. It was forged in public humiliation, stolen voices, shattered relics, and the courage to choose truth over fear. It was a love that taught an alpha king that true power lies not in control but in listening, even when the voice is silent. And in the heart of the moonlit pack, a strong, steady flame burned bright, one that would never be allowed to die again.